And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Wendy Harrington, who learned that she is not just a body and more during her near-death experience. Wendy, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. It's really lovely to be here with you.
Wendy, let's start on the day you died and go from there.
Yeah, sure. So I was expecting my third daughter, and I was 8 months pregnant, or 7 months pregnant. So it was basically, she was 8 weeks premature, and I had to have an emergency cesarean section. And then I contracted necrotizing fasciitis, more commonly known as the flesh-eating disease, and had been put into a medical coma. The surgeons just have to remove the flesh and put you into put me into a medical coma to try and save my life. And I was medically sedated for 10 days. And somewhere in that period was where I had my near-death experience. And the very first thing I remember was I was totally aware of myself, and I knew I wasn't in my body. So the same aspect of myself that I'd always been aware of, whether I was 5, 15, 20, 25, always this same self. So that aspect of self, which I've spoken to many people, and they're like, oh yeah, they have a knowing of that. And I was aware of that. And that had always felt like me. And I had always thought that was, that was this physicality, this body. So to absolutely know I wasn't in the body, and there was more to me than the body. And then I was just floating like a momentum into this incredible light and peace, and just the words would never ever do it justice, but the peace, the tranquility, the bliss. And I was quite happily going. I really wanted to go. I had no thought for this physical world. And all of a sudden there was a tug on my arm, and I looked back, and it was my husband. And I tried to pull him because I really wanted to go, and I really wanted him to come with me, and he wouldn't budge. And then I could see forms taking shape ahead of me, and I just heard telepathically, if you come, you must come on your own. And it felt so nice. I really, really wanted to go. And I tried to pull him again, but he wouldn't budge. And I heard the same thing, if you come, you must come on your own. And I didn't want to leave him. And that decision, then that momentum subsided, and I came back into my body.
Who do you think those voices were that were giving you that information?
Yeah, that's such a, it felt there was more than one of them, because it did feel like there were forms. I could see these beginning, and I think, if I'd continued to go, I think I obviously would have met them, and I would have been able to, well, I maybe wouldn't have come back, so I wouldn't have been able to answer this question. Yeah, just like beings of light, I suppose. It didn't feel like relatives, or, but it may have been. But it felt more, it felt more like beings of light that were so welcoming. I really did want to go towards them, but I didn't want to leave my husband.
Prior to this, what were your religious and spiritual beliefs, and how did they change afterwards?
Yeah, I didn't really think there was anything. I mean, I was raised, my mother was Christian, but not really a practicing Christian, and I went to a Church of England school as a girl, so we went to church with the school. But I never, I wasn't practicing any kind of religion, and I always made me sad, actually, the destruction that had come about because of religion. So I was almost quite anti-religion. But strangely, whenever I was in a church, I would have a sense of something, and it would often make me, some of the songs sometimes would make me cry, which I never quite understood. So there must be, something in that. And after I'd been, so I was in hospital for 3 months, and after I came home, not long after I came home, I had my first experience of what we might call automatic writing, where I woke with a sentence on my head. It was just on repeat. And I got up and I started to write, and it was just like taking dictation. And two things within that, it was sort of all the things we do as humans that, we hurt ourselves. But there was one piece where it said, there is love and fear, and everything in between. And you can create from either. And in order to have a different experience, it's really important that you choose love, but you're unwittingly choosing fear. And the unwitting bit was like really sort of crystal clear, that we don't mean to choose fear, but we choose fear and we're creating our experience. And there was another piece in there where it said, all is well in God's plan. And the interesting thing for me was I had been writing. Like I said, it was just like taking dictation, like someone was talking to me. And I was like, yes, yes, yes. It all made so much sense. But that stopped me for a minute because I didn't believe in God, and I certainly didn't believe there was a plan. Yeah, but now I do. I think it's definitely, well, that greater love. There's definitely something greater, and that I believe that there is a plan. I don't quite know what it is. I think maybe, it's the plan is love, and then love acts in a very different way than fear acts.
I'm sure your husband and you have spoken about this many times. When you told him that he wouldn't budge, did he have any feeling on this side that perhaps you were pulling him?
Yeah, I don't think he quite believed me in my experience of my near death, and he didn't have a chance, any sense that I was pulling him. But what's interesting was that him and my mum, kind of had a bedside vigil, and they were holding my hand the whole time that I was medically sedated. And I've often wondered, if they hadn't been, would I have gone? Actually, would I have left? I'm not sure. Was there that physical anchor here that meant that I didn't go? So yeah, for him, no, there was no sense of me pulling him in any way. He was just willing me to not go, willing me
Well,
to live.
when you're doing your automatic writing, do you think that you're channeling information from your higher self or some other being?
Yeah, it's it's so interesting, isn't it? It always used to feel to me like it was wise beings as well, almost not just one,
Like
even though they may have one voice,
like a collective?
like a collective. Yeah, yeah, like a collective. And um, and I never really questioned it much. So there was that piece of writing. There's also a whole lot of really beautiful poems that are all about oneness and connection and love, and they came through in the same way. So it always felt like being given them, and yeah, and I didn't feel like my higher self. It felt like a collective of beings sharing wisdom.
After your experience, did you notice that you had any other abilities that you didn't have prior?
Yeah, one of the things which has really opened up over the years is feeling, like just a capacity to feel really deeply in a way of I guess being unafraid. One of the things over the years has been that, that if we can feel fear, as in the energy of fear, not in a physicality. So I think that much of our struggle and our suffering, it is a psychological thing. It's not a physical thing, and that's what has us in tremendous pain and struggle. And the capacity to feel and be unafraid is that everything then opens up and sort of returns to peace. It's like peace is always there, love is always there, but this other stuff just kind of gets in the way.
You're a trained psychologist?
Well, I've done a psychology degree. I'm not a qualified psychologist. So for me, I researched psychology, and I also researched a lot of Eastern philosophy and energy and things like that. And that my greatest peace was found not in the psychology, actually in the Eastern sort of teachings, and also like coming out of the intellect and coming into the body. And one of the greatest and most helpful things for me actually has been A Course in Miracles. I'm a student of A Course in Miracles. Because it was the one text that really fitted with the spiritual experiences that I was having.
Many near death experiences talk about it's all about love and maybe everything comes from love. And I just thought about while you're talking that some people may say that basically love and fear are emotions. So why does everything, in your opinion, come from love? Or why do you think everything comes down to those two emotions, love and fear?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, Jeff. And I think it's the semantics is the answer, because I think we think of love and fear as emotions as human beings. And I think they're forces of energy. And I began to question my near-death experience when I was studying the psychology, because one of the theories is a near-death experience is just something that the brain does at that point in time. And I thought, well, maybe it was. And also I was on a cocktail of drugs, and who knows. And I was doing a Tai Chi retreat, and I'd ate my lunch in silence. And then we were doing an exercise with a tree. So the instructor had said, find a tree, close your eyes, put your hands out, to connect with the trunk of the tree, and then just gently, begin to move your hands backwards and forwards. And so I closed my eyes and started to move my hands backwards and forwards. And all of a sudden, I lost all sense of my separate self again. I met the same love that I met during my near-death experience. And the words for it were unconditional love. And I knew that everything came from it and everything returned to it. And this is where I think that what we think as humans love is not really what love is. It's often we're trying to possess something, we're trying to get something, we're looking for it somewhere else. But actually it's a force of energy which ultimately is us. And another experience I had, with love like that was where my husband and I actually had separated. We hadn't. I really struggled to come to terms with my physical body, and it was a very difficult time. And we'd ended up splitting up. So I had a period where I was single, and I'd had a brief relationship with someone that hadn't worked out, and I wasn't that fussed that it hadn't worked out with him. But I was a little bit, why does no one love me? And for me, I'd always been looking for love ever since I was very young. I have a very dysfunctional parenting, and I was searching for that special one, that special someone who was going to make everything okay and make life perfect. And so I asked lots. So I sort of just threw it up to, the heavens or God, source, whatever you may call it. And I just said, like, what is this? Because I'm so bored of it. Like, will you just show me what's going on? And I went to sleep. And in the morning, I woke up and I got into my shower. And all of a sudden, I was just flooded, like inside, love, love, love. And I realized, it's in me. Love is a presence, an essence, a force, and it's in us. And so I would say, as God, love is a presence, an essence, a force, that then is flowing through us as human beings to be the extension of love. So then we're like the overflowing cup of love, as opposed to thinking we don't have it and trying to get it, which is commonly what happens, I think, when we get caught in that. I always see like we're caught in a veil of fear, and we haven't, we're in an idea that we're separate, not realizing that actually we're in a union. And I think that is like the Great Awakening, isn't it? We are waking up, we are realizing everything is connected. There aren't these, solid boundaries that we thought there were.
So, do you think that love is basically energy, perhaps creative energy, and then really fear is just the lack of that energy?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
perhaps that's the only way our brain can sort it all
yeah,
out, is just with the emotion of
yeah.
love.
And that, like, fear is literally a lack of it. That's all it is. It's not there. So yeah, when we can start to, it's like love, but yeah, it is like, I do think love is the solution to all of the problems that we have, but not when we understand what it truly is, and that love is an experience, not an intellectual idea. I think that commonly trips us up as human beings. I think we have a lot of concepts about spirituality, and that the lived experience is everyone's own direct knowing of it.
Do you think that your marriage didn't initially survive because after the experience, you had an unrealistic expectation of the amount of love that you should get from your husband?
I think it was the opposite, actually. That what my understanding now from my own, experience over the years is that when I received that message about there's love and fear and everything in between, I was in that moment, I just sort of vowed to be as loving as I possibly could. And then the journey I went on actually was to learn what love truly is, and also all the ways where I wasn't love and I was in the way of love. And so I think I always wanted love and I was desperately looking for it, but I was also terrified of it.
Hmm.
And, you know, he loved me so much that I almost couldn't accept that, where I couldn't accept myself. So I think, you know, when people say, you know, you can only love another to the extent that you love yourself, you know, I really think there's something in that, because when we love ourselves, then we allow ourselves to receive love. And I also think that is what blocks our experience of the love of God, source, the universe, whatever anybody may call it, is our idea that we're not worthy of that love, that in some way, you know, we're sinners. If you think the collective idea that there's this almighty God and we're sinners, you know, the mind is a powerful tool which is creating experience. That, to me, that is like the image and likeness of God, source, the universe. Is we are creative beings, and we create through, you know, thought and belief. And so if we believe, and I suppose there's stories, you know, telling those stories, then that's the experience that we have. So yeah, to start to open up to the idea that, you know, I am love, I am that energy, you know, I can be a vessel, I can be at one with it.
I believe that the research out there shows that about 70% of near-death experiencers wind up in divorce. If you had to speculate on that, why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, we actually got back together and got remarried.
That's great.
And you know, I think, but it rocks your world. Like, you know, it is like you had a, you know, I feel like I had a map of the world. You know, this is life, this is what it is. And then all of a sudden you'll always tear that map up and throw it away. And it's quite disconcerting. You know, who am I? You know, who are we all? Like, what is this place? And so I think, you know, the whole like life's too short thing as well, because, you know, I think maybe some people, like, then not with their, you know, the person that is the best person, where they're going to flourish the most, and potentially that's where they're like, well, this is too short for this, because this is not the best thing for me. And you know, my husband and I, our experience, when we met, I mean, I was married at the time, actually, with two small children, but I just like really fell in love, and so did he, and it felt like this is my soulmate. And so it was very weird, actually, after, you know, choosing not to die to be with him and then ending up not together, was painful for me for a long time. But actually, in not being together was part of really what helped me really learn to love, because he had other long-term relationships. I had one sort of semi-long-term relationship, but I also had a long time being single. And that for me was exactly what I needed to realize that I was the love I was looking for. And also to know that I loved him, and I would rather he was with someone else if that was where he was happier, instead of being upset that he was with someone else. So it taught me a lot. And he always says that for him, he didn't realize what we had, actually. And so it wasn't until, you know, he in him being with other people, that he realized what we had. But we never spoke properly about it, and things like that, you know. It's sometimes I guess it's also on some level some kind of self-sabotage, where we don't allow. Yeah, I think it's where we're blocking love ourselves, you know, from source, and also from each other. You know, all our judgment is a block, isn't it? Anything that judges creates some kind of division, and then we don't experience the fullness of the love that we can.
I really love the way that you put it, and that was, I was the love that I was looking for. And do you think that goes with all of us, that we should look within for the love that
Yeah,
we're actually looking for?
yeah, yeah. I think every single one of us is the love we're looking for. And actually, you know, and that actually that is, you know, God, source, the universe, that is that energy of love that we were talking about, is like it resides in us. And isn't it weird that, you know, we're looking outside, aren't we, often? I mean, I know I spent my whole life looking outside for the solutions. And yeah, and it's insight,
Well,
and
how do
it's limitless.
how do we find it?
Yeah, well, so for me, the first piece I discovered was emotions. That the emotions actually were a block, and that I, if you think about it, there's lots of emotions that we avoid, like shame, guilt, fear. We don't want to feel them; they don't feel nice, and they're a block where we don't feel them. And so but I went to India in 2008 to learn emotional processing, and it was such an amazing process because it was really like learning to stop the intellect and to stop thinking and instead come into the body and really start to just feel and breathe and just allow and observe. And that when you do that, everything moves, and then there's a natural peace that arises because it it's like it is there. It's just like under these under shame, under guilt, etc. And that was incredibly helpful. I wrote a book about that. I wrote it into a book called Process and Prosper. And in there it was a 7-step process, but now I always share 4 steps. Is it okay to share if I share the 4 steps, Jeff?
That would be great.
Mm. So just to make it simpler, because people couldn't remember. So the first one is own it. So I'll go through them first and then I'll just talk a little bit more. So number 1 is own it. Number 2 is stop thinking. I know that sounds insane, but don't worry, we'll come back to that. Number 3 is start feeling, and 4 is breathe and observe. So number 1, own it, is a bit like we were talking about, where you have to move yourself from the outside perception to an inside. And so rather than, I think I used to think, well, people have done things and that's why I feel like I feel. And so that you have to own that actually this feeling is arising in me. It is not because of what is happening outside of me. So this responsibility of the what is arising within the feeling and the thinking, that this is arising within me and it's mine. It's not because someone else has done something, which is where we start to come into our true power. And then number 2, stop thinking. I know that's impossible to stop thinking. And it's more about just realizing that the intellect does not have the answers that we're looking for. We're trying to figure it out with intellect. I feel like that's what we've been trying to do for a long time, since Freud, that we're trying to think our way out of the problem, but the thinking itself is the problem. So we just have to realize that doesn't have the answers. And so instead you do step 3, which is where you start to feel. So you're bringing your attention and your awareness to the body to allow yourself to feel in the body what sensations are arising. And a bit like we were talking about then, rather than seeing love or fear as an emotion, if we instead just see these as energies, they're all energies, shame, fear, guilt, just energies. And that we can then, number 4, just breathe and observe the energy. And it is the observer piece is about, there's nothing to fix, there's nothing to change, there's nothing to figure out, there's nothing to get rid of, that you're just becoming the observer. And then I think what opens up when that really does land and that happens for you, it's a bit like what I was saying when I was first out of my body, and I knew I was not my body. Because often I feel like I'm watching from that space when I feel very open. So I'm still here having this physical experience. I'm not fully ensconced in it, and there's a lightness to it and a joy to it. So I reckon that we are all here to awaken and live, in like a spirit human, to have the experience of our spirit in form. And then we are out of the suffering and we are instead in the delight of being alive. And I remember, like, not long after my near-death experience, as some of the initial sort of trauma of coming into the body was quite a shock, and what was left to deal with. But then not long after that, it was like, it felt like this life was this incredible gift to be lived, yet often it just feels like this really heavy problem to be solved. And I remember delighting in, I just remember one day having, like, my gosh, I've got this hand and it can pick things up and do things. Like, this human body is remarkable. And I got these cats because I knew that, well, where I go next is not tangible. And to be able to touch is a wonderful experience. So I got these beautiful cats. They were Burmese. They both passed on now, bless them, it was a while ago. but they're like velvet to touch. And it was just the tactileness of them for me was just heaven.
You had this experience which awakened you to all these realizations. Do you ever think about the billions of people out there that have never had the experience? And so, would they ever come to this realization that there should be this spirit body connection?
Oh, yeah, what a lovely question. I think there's people out there looking, aren't there? Um, and I think on some level I was looking, because I remember when I was 9 years old thinking, like, is this it? Is this life, that you kind of get married and have a couple of kids and like is and a holiday once a year, do a job you don't really like, and then retire? It seemed a bit weird to me. And so I think there are many people who are looking for something else, and probably anybody that's listening here is there's something in them that's looking for something else. And then maybe there are some people that go through this experience this time around and are never looking for anything else potentially. And I guess it's like when we're aware of our own inner struggle, maybe that's when we look, because there's somewhere we know, I think somewhere we must know that there is something else. Because it is, for all of us, I believe that the unconditional love, the force we're talking about, is our natural essence. And perhaps some people are totally removed from it and don't think about it.
Mm.
It's amazing too, isn't it, how struggle, this is where I think is one of the weird things, isn't it, is that often our struggle and our suffering can be the very thing that does awaken us. Because it's like the shiny distractions of the world, the physicality, like they just don't cut it, do they, at certain points? Nothing, sometimes like you're in such pain that nothing can distract you from it. And I think maybe that's when you look in and then you start to find out who you truly are.
Would you say that even though you've gone through experience and processed all this, you yourself even still have struggles that you have to work through?
Oh yeah, I'm always learning new things about myself. I find, but the interesting thing now is, for a long time it was quite yes, it was a struggle, and I'd kind of work my way through things, and sometimes they take ages. Whereas now it feels like a delight to see all the trying to think of a word without swearing, all the nonsense that the ego mind creates. It creates a lot of false ideas that keep us in a trap. And my latest kind of fascination actually is the patterning of certain types of, I call them, they're like protective mechanisms. So things like the perfectionist or procrastination, all of it is like some kind of self-protection of we call the ego self. And that as we can start to see it and see how it operates and realize that is not us, then we get to open up to a different experience. So I love seeing anywhere I see some limiting idea, some limiting belief. I feel like I always laugh, Jeff, because I say I've been working on surrender for 15 years, and I probably will for the rest of my life, to surrender to that which is greater, to allow fully that love to come into this experience. So that goes on all the time too, further surrender all the time. But yeah, so they feel it feels less of a struggle though, and more of a sort of delightful expansion.
During your NDE, did you experience death of the ego at all?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. I think I did, because I had no thought for this human world. So I would think that, if I was to interpret that, I would say that's probably death of the ego, but there's no thought at all for the physicality. I was just quite happily going. I wanted to go, it felt delightful. And it wasn't until I had the tug on my arm, that was the thing that stopped me. And so, yeah, I would say that was death of the ego. And even then, there was no thought, because I remember my father saying to me, actually, when I'd come back, I remember him saying, "Oh, you must have known that you just had a baby." And it was like, no, there was no thought for my children. That there was no thought of anything in the physicality till that tug on my arm. So I'm guessing that probably is death of the ego, isn't it? The ego is this idea of a separate self having this experience, isn't it?
Do you believe that if you want to exist in this realm, you must have ego? So while you're here, it's just part of the game and you have to deal with it.
Yes, and I think yes, probably, because if that is the thing which gives us the physicality, which is something I ponder, and I think may be true, but the beauty is when you're not attached to it, then it isn't like something that you've got to suffer with. It becomes this delightful thing that's malleable and you can change it. And I love the fact, actually, in the science sort of how there's DNA and like, boom, that's it, we're stuck with all this stuff. And now it's much more, isn't it? No, this DNA is just a potential for, and science is saying, isn't it, everything is malleable. And I believe that includes the ego self. But it's like we get to mold and shape and play with and go, oh, I'm functioning in that way. What if I want to function in a different way? And I also think here is where we start to allow ourselves to open up to universal laws and principles as opposed to just human laws and principles. That, one of the universal laws obviously being the law of polarity, that everything has an equal and opposite in our polarity of physicality. And when we realize that we have a choice, then we get to choose. I think often we don't realize we have a choice. We're just repeating patterning and programming without realizing that we have a choice.
Do you think then that the ego is the cause of all suffering because we're always trying to satisfy that ego and materialism and things of the sort? And once you let go of the ego, then your suffering subsides.
Yeah, I think that the ego is a protective mechanism kind of created to help us cope and survive when we've forgotten who we truly are, that we hit this fear veil. I sort of see it like we come in from, that love that we were talking about, and we hit this fear veil, and then we create meaning about who we are, and that creates the ego, and it's like a coping mechanism in order to survive, with the idea that I exist in separation, which I think ultimately is not true. I don't think it's a truth. I think it's an idea that we have, a false idea. And I wonder, that as we more of that love is entering into the mind and we're experiencing, the energy of that itself, whether the ego kind of becomes, and like we were saying, almost like we get to play and be here and experience the delight of life as a gift, because we see like heaven on earth, we get to have heaven, instead of being this struggle. So a bit like we were saying that, in fact, there's a lovely bit in A Course in Miracles where it says sin is simply a lack of love. We were talking earlier, weren't we, about like love. If we let love in, what does happen? And when we really let love to the ego, because the ego is often like it functions, doesn't it, in attack and defense. That's kind of how it functions. So as we're not functioning in that way, then we can start to see ourselves, and then we can start to realize there's a choice, and I'm a choice, as opposed to, like we say, just no choice because I'm just caught in the patterns, in the suffering. But I think there's definitely something, like you said, in the non-attachment to it. I think that the attachment to things is often the thing which causes a lot of suffering.
From listening to you, I feel that you believe in reincarnation. And if you do, why do we keep coming back over and over again?
Yeah, that's a really lovely question too. Yeah, I think I do, because I think that I remember once having this, it felt like a eureka moment, and I was like, wow, this must have been what Einstein felt like. And I was just journaling one day, and then I just drew this, because I was pondering like, what is the point of life? What is the point of it? And it was a circle, and it was unity at the top to separation and back again. And it felt to me like every lifetime that happened, and that actually there was a greater collective story of humanity. And that actually, as humanity, we were on this, we'd come to the brink of separation, and we were on this upward to the return to union, which if I look at our kind of history, I can kind of see that happening. if you think of the ancient Aborigines and things like that, how, they were, one with everything. Then we've kind of come away, the mechanics and all of that. And now there seems to be, more sense of union, etc. coming. I know it doesn't always feel like that when you look out at the world sometimes, but sometimes I think when the things get really shaken up and they look really bad, is actually because we're on the cusp of big change. And so, yes, so that kind of the idea of every lifetime to me feels like, yeah, we come around, we get to come and have a different human experience. We come back again. And why do we keep doing it? I don't know. There's things that I don't comprehend. I remember what I do feel, though, is like right now to be having this human experience for me feels like a really delightful gift. And I'm really pleased to be here. And I remember another spiritual teacher once saying that it was a friend of mine that told me she was in his group, and he'd said, here we are again. And he said, we love this bit, the waking up, that there's something delightful about it. And maybe that's why we keep recycling around. I'd just be making other stuff up, Jeff, because I don't have any, do you know what I mean? I can think of other things that people have said as to why we come round and other theories that they are, etc. But I haven't had any other than my circle. I don't have any other wisdom as to why yet.
Do you fear death at all?
No, I think it's beautiful. I think it's really beautiful. I hope I don't suffer in the physicality, but I think I'll remain pretty relaxed about that. And no, I think it's just wonderful. And also I like I love your question, because actually, yeah, I do believe that something else happens and then we probably come back, and I don't know what happens, but I certainly really feel like we are limitless beings. Nothing ends. It's not the end.
Many people who watch these videos are suffering over the loss of a loved one.
Mm.
And if you had a friend that was suffering, what kind of advice would you give?
Oh, yeah. It's hard, isn't it, when the missing of a person in the physicality. And yeah, so this is I think love to celebrate the life of the person who's been lost, and allow yourself to still really love them, and to give yourself time, because sometimes these things we just need some time, don't we? And that if we're sad and we're grieving, that's okay. Allow the sadness, allow the grief, and know that they're at peace. Actually, know that I'm reminded of Byron Katie, actually. Somebody, I remember reading a thing where she was out with her daughter and somebody had said to her, how is your mother? She bumped into a woman she hadn't seen for years, and she said, how is your mother? And Byron Katie said, oh, she's wonderful. She's dead. Because the woman didn't know that her mother had passed, and her daughter said to her, oh, Mum, you can't talk to people like that. But I kind of get what she means, because in that fully, open space, like that person is, free, liberated, doing what they're doing, and yeah, and in happiness. And also I remember doing some work once with family constellations. Do you know family constellations work, Jeff?
I don't.
Oh, so it's beautiful work. It's Bert Hellinger, it's his work. And it's very much about the energetics of the dynamics of a family. And when you do the work, you have a number of people gather together, and somebody will come with something that they're challenged with in their life. And then certain people will stand to represent certain family members, and you watch it act out like a play. And I'd gone with a friend of mine, and he got chosen to play somebody who had been killed early. He's a teenager, and he'd been in an accident and died. And afterwards, he said to me, oh my God, he said, that was an amazing experience. He said, I got up with all these ideas in my mind that he would be, angry, that his life was cut short. And he said, and I lay down, and he said, oh, this peace, just like, he said, the peace just came over me, and I was so happy. So I think that, for me, in the my near-death experience, I was so happy. It was beautiful. And that is not the end. The end of this round of a human experience. The physicality will stop. This Wendy version. I have points where I feel so awake. I call it the Wendy body because I can't quite say me because it's not true. And so there is something more. There is definitely something more. And, your loved one is in the sea of bliss. And our human missing is our human missing, isn't it? And yeah, allow connection where you can, find other people to have a hug. Yeah.
You have another book that you didn't mention, which is called From Vegas to the Pearly Gates. I don't think your NDE happened in Vegas, so what is that book about?
Yeah. So that book is about my experience of my illness and my near-death experience, and then the journey afterwards. And the spiritual realizations and the liberations that came. And from Vegas to the pearly gates, because my husband's called Roland, we all call him Ro. When we first got married, we ran off to Vegas and got married. We didn't tell anybody, so we got married in Vegas.
Did you get married by Elvis?
No, we didn't get married by Elvis, but we got married in Vegas, and then I remember not long after my near-death experience having this sense of like feeling like the pearly gates, just seeing the inadequacies of myself as a human, and that really felt like the pearly gates, this kind of what I had in sort of my mind as the judgment of it. But the beauty of that too is I think with spirit, you see yourself, you see, the ego, the inadequacies of it, anything where you have not been great or done your greatest in the treatment of another. But the beauty is like none of it is judged. Actually, I think we have the human perception of it, which is a judgment. But in love, it's like all of it is just embraced. None of it is made wrong, but you just get to see, oh yeah, actually that just causes pain. Because one of the things I've come to understand, and like I say, in the kind of the messages that I receive, and there's like pain creates pain. It doesn't mean to, it's just how it functions. And love creates love because it's just how it functions. And so I think forgiveness is a wonderful practice, actually, to allow us to free ourselves from the chains, if you like, the chains of the human experience, and experience more of that love here in form right now. That's my most passionate thing, Jeff, is I believe we can all live in this love right now. I believe we don't have to have a near-death experience, that we can open up to it. Like you were asking me, how do we open up to it in order to experience it right now? And then all of us, as we're living in love, creates a very different experience on the planet.
So would it be best to use those 4 steps that you mentioned previously?
Yeah, it's like pieces of a puzzle. I see it like the awakening puzzle, and to learn to process emotion and let it flow, so that it's like clearing energy. I always see it like we've got pots of shame and guilt and anger that we're hiding away from ourselves. And so when we can just like lift the lid and just allow ourselves to breathe with it, because life's happening for us. I also believe that life is happening for us to bring us home to our true selves, our true nature.
Wendy, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that? And if so, how do they contact you?
Yes, absolutely open to people reaching out and asking questions. My website is wendy-harrington.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I think Wendy Harrington author in those places. And I have a link tree. Could I give you a link tree link?
Sure, I'll put it in the description.
Yeah, that would be lovely. I'll give you that, and then that has links to the books and But yeah, those are the best ways to connect. And yeah, always love to connect and answer questions.
Do you have anything that you're working on that you want people to know about?
I tend to, in my work, I tend to work with like women entrepreneurs, women who have a sense of a calling and know that they're holding themselves back in some way. So that for the moment has the focus of my work. And for me as well, it's also like putting those pieces of the puzzle together is so that we can come to experience ourselves as the love of that. I think some of the poems are on the website if people wanted to go and read those. I do a masterclass. Actually, I do a regular masterclass called Inner Champion to Inner Critic. And there actually I share some other pieces that I've discovered. So we talk about that emotion, the processing of the emotions, but we also talk about some of the other pieces of, like I say, that I would call the awakening puzzle. And that's Wendy-Harrington.com/masterclass. That can be found there. So that's probably a good place to start.
In working with women who hold themselves back, have you noticed any patterns of limiting beliefs that surface over and over again that you can share with us?
Yes. And I was saying about like the deeper pattern. So not just the limiting belief, but actually what is the pattern that we're seeing. So for example, the perfectionist pattern is one that when we and the underlying belief will be something like I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough, who's going to listen to me? Those are the kinds of thoughts that you see, but the underlying sense of unworthiness that then the ego mind in the unconscious mind will then I'll do the perfectionist pattern in order to try and feel like I'm enough. Of course, as we know, it never works, does it? Nothing is ever enough. And there are so many pieces in the perfectionist, isn't it? That the perfectionist will pick up the one tiny thing that didn't work when 99% of what they did was fantastic. So that's a really common pattern that I see. Procrastination is another common pattern that I see, where, because I always feel like that sense of the calling, it's like it rises up from within you. You can try and push it down, but it's very difficult to. And so then, because I feel like this was my journey too. We start to take that action, we start to make some movement, but then something comes in the way and sabotages it, or that procrastination, which is, again, it's actually like self-protection, because we don't want to it's like the avoidance of emotions is the thing. I don't want to feel humiliated, or I don't want to feel ashamed, or I don't want to feel guilty, or so I don't want to do any of those things that potentially might mean that I end up feeling like that.
Wendy, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Yeah, that you are love. It is within you. Like we said, if I want to come back to, you are the love that you are looking for. It is within you, and that you have access to the infinite love that, we may call God, source, the universe, whatever you may call it, or whatever you may not call it. Know that there is a greater something of infinite love that loves you completely and is completely accepting of you just as you are. And that there is nothing, I had an experience once where I just knew that there's nothing so bad that any of us as humans could do that means that we are not loved. We are always loved. And that, yeah, we are that love. You are that love.
Wendy, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you ever so much for having me as your guest, Jeff. It's been really lovely to chat and explore with you.
Thank you. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.